There is a moment, and I know you know the one I mean, when you walk into a room and you can feel in the first 3 seconds exactly what that room has already decided about you. Not from anything that's been said, from the half second someone takes a little too long to look up, from the way a chair doesn't quite get pulled out. From the smile that arrives a beat too late and leaves a beat too early. From the way a name gets handled, yours, like it's a word someone is choosing not to learn. I have walked into hundreds of rooms in my life. I knew how to read them before I knew how to read words. It is the first language I ever spoke fluently. But that morning, the third Tuesday of March, 42nd floor, Midtown Manhattan, the room was louder than usual, not in volume, in assumption. You can hear assumption if you've trained yourself to. It has a frequency. It sits underneath the small talk and the coffee and the handshakes, humming. They had made a decision about me before I sat down, and what happened in the next 3 hours is the reason I'm telling you this story today. Stay until the end, because the ending is not what any of them expected, and I'll be honest with you, it wasn't entirely what I expected either. Before I go further, there's a reason this channel exists, not just to tell stories, but to hold them. Because somewhere out there, and I believe this deeply, there is someone watching this who has walked into that room, who has felt that assumption press against them like something physical. Who has a story that deserves to be heard, but has never quite found the right place to put it? This is that place. At Vellum of Life, we receive stories from real people, just like you, and we transform them into something that can be shared with the world while keeping your identity completely protected. Your name changes, your city changes. Every detail that could identify you changed. What remains is the truth at the center of your experience, and that truth is exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. If you carry a story of being overlooked, underestimated, or quietly proven right, write to us. The address is vellumoflife@gmail.com. No formatting required, no polished draft needed. It can be a voice message transcribed, a few rough paragraphs, a memory you've never put into words before. We'll take it from there. Now, let me tell you what happened in that room. But first, you have to understand who walked into it. And to understand that, we have to go back to Harlem. My name is Simone. I grew up in Harlem. Not the Harlem that gets written about in glossy magazines now, with the boutique hotels and the art galleries and the curated coffee shops. The Harlem I grew up in was the one before all of that. The one where the bodega on the corner knew your grandmother's order, where the summers smelled like concrete and someone's cooking 2 floors up. Where the man who fixed shoes had fixed your mother's shoes, and his father had fixed hers. Where everybody knew everybody, and being known was a kind of wealth that didn't show up on any statement. Where ambition was treated like something delicate, something you kept indoors so the weather wouldn't get to it. You didn't announce what you wanted. You built it quietly, and you let it be discovered. My mother was a paralegal for 31 years. She worked for the same firm from the year I was born until the year she retired. She never made partner. She was never asked. She was never going to be. She knew more about case law than half the attorneys she supported. I watched her prove it, quietly, every single day of my childhood. A partner would walk to her desk with a problem and walk away with an answer he'd later present as his own. She never complained about this, not once. I used to wait for it, the bitterness, the venting, the moment she'd let it out. It never came. What she did instead was point. At books, at problems, at the space between what was accepted as true and what was actually true. She taught me to live in that space, to be comfortable there, to make it my home. On the nights she brought work home, I'd sit across from her at the kitchen table, doing my own homework, and I'd watch her read. The way she read was a kind of listening. She used to say,
Simone, the loudest person in the room is rarely the most informed one. Pay attention to who's quiet. The quiet ones are the ones doing the actual work. And then decide carefully whether you want to be the one they underestimate.
I asked her once why anyone would want to be underestimated. She didn't look up from her papers. She just said, "Because, baby, you can't surprise someone who already sees you coming." I decided early. I decided I would be the one they didn't see coming. I studied finance at a state school in Connecticut. Not an Ivy, not a name that opens doors before you knock. The kind of name you have to explain, and then explain again. The kind of school where you had to be excellent just to be noticed. And being noticed was the beginning, not the destination. I learned to be excellent quietly. It's a different skill than being excellent loudly. Fewer people teach it. I was hired at 23 by a mid-sized private equity firm in Lower Manhattan. I was one of 2 black women in the analyst pool. The other one was named Renee. She was brilliant, sharper than me, honestly. Renee left after 14 months. I remember the day she cleaned out her desk. She wasn't angry. She was tired. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole story. I understood why she left. I also understood why I stayed. Renee was fighting the room. I had decided, a long time ago, at a kitchen table in Harlem, that I wasn't going to fight the room. I was going to outlast it. In 8 years, I built a portfolio track record that I don't need to describe to you because numbers don't lie and reputations travel. The work was good. The work was, in fact, undeniable. That word matters, undeniable. I'll come back to it. What I will tell you is that in those 8 years, I was passed over for 2 promotions. Both went to men with shorter track records and easier last names to pronounce at client dinners. The first time, I told myself it was close. Maybe it was. The second time, I stopped telling myself anything. I just watched. I watched how the decision got made and who made it, and what they assumed I wouldn't notice. I noted this. I didn't perform a reaction to it. There's a version of this story where I storm into someone's office. That version feels good for about a day. I've watched people live in that day for years. I noted it, the way my mother noted things, and I moved. At 31, I left the firm, quietly. No dramatic exit, no speech. I took 3 clients with me, legally, cleanly, with 6 months of proper notice. The clients came because the work was undeniable. There's that word again. I opened my own advisory practice out of a 1-room office in Midtown, with a laptop, a landline I barely used, and a gold pen my mother gave me the day I passed my CFA exam. It's not an expensive pen. That's the part people get wrong. It's thin, matte gold, a little worn at the clip, old, the kind of thing that means nothing to a stranger and everything to the person holding it. The pen has been in my breast pocket every day since. I have never clicked it in a meeting, but people notice it. And sometimes what people notice and what they decide it means is the whole point. The invitation came on a Wednesday evening in February. My phone buzzed once against the desk and went still. I let it sit there for a moment before I picked it up. I've never trusted things that demand to be answered immediately. A joint acquisition meeting. 3 parties at the table. Hargrove Capital, the firm bringing the deal, Meridian Holdings, the acquisition target, and a third-party financial advisor, brought in to evaluate terms. That third-party advisor was me.
They had asked for me by reputation, not by face. This is important. On paper, I was a track record, a name attached to a number attached to a number. They had hired the work. They had not yet met the woman. What I knew, and what Hargrove Capital did not know I knew, was that the deal they were about to present had a structural problem buried in Clause 14 of the secondary agreement.
It was the kind of thing you'd only catch if you read the secondary agreement, the way my mother read case law, as a kind of listening. Most people skim the secondary agreement. The secondary agreement is where the truth hides. A problem that would cost the acquiring party approximately $9 million within the first 18 months of close. Not a rounding error, not a footnote. A $9 million hole, sitting quietly under a clause everyone had agreed not to look at too closely. I had found it 3 weeks earlier. I had said nothing, not to anyone. I sat with it the way you sit with a card you're not ready to play. Because I had learned, from my mother, from 8 years in private equity, from every room that looked at me and made its decision in the first 3 seconds, that there is a time to speak, and there is a time to let the room reveal itself first. A truth delivered too early is just an argument. A truth delivered at the right moment is gravity. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning. I arrived at 9:47. The 42nd floor of Hargrove Capital looked exactly like what it was trying to say about itself. Everything in that office was a sentence, and the sentence was, "We have already won, and you are visiting." Floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference table long enough to seat 14 comfortably, chairs that cost more than my first month's rent in Manhattan, a view of Midtown that on clear days reaches all the way to the Hudson. The receptionist was kind. They usually are. She offered me water, coffee, a place to wait. She was the only person on that floor who looked at me directly all morning. I've thought about that since. There were already 4 people in the room when I was escorted in. 3 men from Hargrove, 1 man from Meridian, all of them in suits that communicated seniority without effort, all of them holding coffee they hadn't poured themselves. All of them in conversation that paused just slightly when I came through the door. The pause. I know the pause. I've been walking into it for a decade. You learn not to flinch at it. You learn to walk through it like weather. The Hargrove partner, his name was Garrett, mid-50s, silver at the temples, stood and extended his hand. He had the posture of a man who has been in charge of rooms for so long he no longer thinks about whether he should be.
Miss Clark, thank you for coming in.
The tone was correct, perfectly professional, but the word "in" landed with a particular weight, as if I were a vendor, as if I had been summoned rather than retained, as if the building had done me a favor by letting me up. I've learned to hear the difference between "thank you for coming" and "thank you for coming in." It is the difference of a single word, and it is the difference of an entire worldview. I shook his hand. I said nothing about it. I settled into my chair, placed my portfolio on the table, closed, and said nothing. Saying nothing is a skill. People assume silence is absence. Silence, used correctly, is the most occupied a room can be. The presentation began at 10:14. Garrett led. He was good, I'll give him that. Confident without being aggressive. Numbers presented cleanly. He was not a villain. I want to be clear about that, because this is not a story about a villain. Garrett was a pattern wearing a very good suit, the kind of speaker who has given this exact presentation in this exact room enough times that it flows like a speech he no longer has to memorize. For the first 20 minutes, I listened. I took no notes. I held the gold pen between two fingers, not writing, just present. I was building a map of the room, of the deal, of the exact moment the floor would open under it. At 22 minutes in, one of the Hargrove associates, younger, maybe 28, passed a summary document down the table. He skipped me. Not dramatically, not with any visible intention. That's the part I want you to understand. There was no cruelty in it. He simply went past me to the Meridian representative, as if the stack of papers had a natural destination, and I was not on the route. That gesture, the small, automatic, unthinking gesture of a young man handing papers to everyone who mattered, told me more about that room than anything Garrett said all morning. It was a map of who was real to them. I was not on the map. I watched this happen. I said nothing. I looked at Garrett. Garrett was looking at his notes. He hadn't seen it. That's the thing about patterns. The people inside them never see them. They just live there, comfortable, certain the weather has always been this fair. A few minutes later, during the Q&A portion, Garrett opened the floor, looking specifically at the Meridian representative.
James, I'm sure you have questions about the valuation model.
James did. Good questions, actually. And for the next 11 minutes, the conversation existed between the two of them as if the table had exactly 2 seats. 11 minutes. I counted. I always count. Numbers don't lie.
I sat in the space they had decided I occupied, which was no space at all, and I let them. There is a kind of patience that looks like weakness from the outside and feels like power from the inside. I was deep inside it now. At one point, and this is the moment I want you to hold on to, Garrett referenced the third-party analysis.
The advisory report we commissioned supports our valuation. I can walk you through the key findings.
He was about to explain my work, to the room, without looking at me, as if the person who had produced it were not sitting 4 feet to his left, breathing the same recycled air, holding a thin gold pen. I let him begin. I let him get 3 sentences in. I wanted him to have the running start. I wanted the contrast to be clean. Then I clicked the pen, once. It was the first time I had clicked it since the meeting began, and in that room, in that particular quality of corporate silence, the sound was small and completely precise, a single mechanical click, no reverb. Just the truth of it, landing. Garrett stopped. Not because the sound was loud, it wasn't. Because something in it communicated, without words, that the person who was about to speak had been in this room the entire time, watching, counting, present. I have thought a lot about why that click worked. I think it's because silence has authors, and for 2 hours, they had assumed they were the only ones writing it. The click told them otherwise. I opened my portfolio, slowly. There is no need to rush a moment you've waited 3 weeks for. Actually, I said, and my voice came out exactly as I had trained it to come out in moments like this, calm, specific, and completely without apology. I'd like to walk through the analysis myself.
Of course.
Of course, as if it had always been the plan, as if there had never been a version of the morning where the papers reached me last. The room rearranges itself quickly once it understands. That too is a pattern. I walked through the first 16 pages of the report at a steady pace. Valuation methodology, comparable transactions, revenue projections, risk-adjusted returns. I did not rush.
I did not soften. I did not perform.
Everything Garrett had presented confirmed because the numbers were sound, and I had no interest in manufactured drama. I wasn't there to humiliate anyone. I was there to be correct, out loud, in a room that had assumed I couldn't be. And here is something I've learned. Confirming a man's good work, accurately, in front of the room, before you reveal what he missed, that is far more powerful than contradicting him. It establishes that you are not his opponent. You are his better.
On page 17, I paused. The whole room felt the pause. A pause from a person who has been silent for 2 hours is a different animal than a pause from a person who has been talking. Before we move to the recommendation section, I said, I want to flag something in the secondary agreement. I placed the document on the table, open to page 9, clause 14. I walked to the whiteboard without being asked. Nobody asks. You simply stand and you go, and the room follows you with its eyes, because you have already become the center of it.
I wrote 2 numbers and a date. The marker was almost dry. I remember that, the faint scratching sound of it, the only sound in the room. 42 floors up, in a building made of money, and the loudest thing was a dying whiteboard marker.
The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something shifts and everyone feels it, but no one has named it yet. I let that quiet sit. I have never been afraid of a silence I created. The revenue recognition clause, I said, as currently written, creates a deferred liability that doesn't appear on the surface model. Under the current structure, Hargrove would absorb that liability at the 18-month post-close audit. It would not be visible until then, and by then, it would not be optional. I wrote the number on the board.
$9,240,000. I underlined it once. Approximately, I said. The exact figure depends on Q3 performance, but the range is tight. I've stress-tested it 4 ways. It holds. The room held its breath. Garrett looked at the number, then at me, then at his associate, the young one, the one who had handed the papers past me an hour before. His associate was looking at the floor. I want to be honest about something. I did not enjoy that part. People expect that I would. They expect the warm rush of vindication, the private satisfaction of the table turning. It wasn't that. It was quieter than that. It was just true. I want to tell you something about that silence. I have been in many rooms where I was the one who had to prove I belonged. Many rooms where the burden of demonstration was mine and mine alone, regardless of credentials, regardless of preparation, regardless of the quality of my work. You learn to carry that burden so well that you forget you're carrying it, until a day comes when you set it down. I used to spend energy resenting that. I gave myself a year to do it, to really feel it, and then I stopped. Not because the resentment wasn't earned, it was, but because resentment is expensive, and I had learned to be careful about where I put my resources. Resentment asks you to keep paying rent on a room you don't even live in anymore. I moved out. In that silence on the 42nd floor, I felt none of it. What I felt was something cleaner. Something that doesn't have a perfect name, but sits near the words arrived and recognized and finally. Not triumph. Triumph is loud. This was quiet. This was the sound of a thing simply becoming undeniable. Garrett spoke first.
Miss Clark, when did you identify this?
3 weeks ago, I said. I didn't elaborate. The number did the work.
And you waited until today.
It wasn't quite a question. There was something underneath it. Not anger.
something closer to recognition. The sound of a man recalculating, in real time, everything he'd assumed at 10:14 that morning.
I wanted to hear your presentation first, I said, to confirm I hadn't missed something, and I wanted to be sure the room was ready to hear it. There was a pause.
You hadn't missed something. You hadn't.
The meeting ended at 12:41. I know, because I always know. Garrett walked me to the elevator personally, something that had not happened when I arrived. When I arrived, I had been escorted by an assistant. Leaving, I was escorted by the partner. The distance between those two facts is the entire story. In the elevator lobby, he said something I want to be precise about, because the words matter. He didn't rush them. He's a man who's careful with words, which made the next ones cost him something.
I owe you an apology for how this morning began.
Not, I'm sorry if you felt. Not, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Those aren't apologies. Those are doors closing softly. This was an apology. Direct, without architecture around it. He let it stand there, naked, between us. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about my mother at her desk, handing answers to men who would sign their own names underneath them. I thought about the 2 promotions. I thought about Renee cleaning out her desk, tired. I thought about 11 minutes of a conversation that had existed without me, in a room I had been hired to occupy. I thought about a stack of papers traveling down a table past my hands, as if I were furniture. And then I let all of it go, because I had somewhere better to put my energy. Thank you, I said. Not, it's fine, because it wasn't fine. Not, don't worry about it, because he should worry about it. Not with guilt, but with attention. Just, thank you. Because an apology that's offered cleanly deserves a response that receives it cleanly. Grace is not the same as forgiveness of pattern. I did not forgive the pattern. The pattern is bigger than Garrett, and it will be in some other room tomorrow morning, handing papers past some other woman's hands. But the moment, that single clean moment, was worth taking. The elevator came, I stepped in. He held the door for a second.
We'd like you on the restructured deal, not as third-party advisor, as co-lead.
Co-lead. The morning had begun with a stack of papers deciding I wasn't on the route. It ended with the route being redrawn around me. I let the door close. I didn't answer him yet. Let him hold the question for a while. I had held mine for 3 weeks. I rode down 42 floors alone. I watched the numbers count backward. I thought about how far up they'd built that office, and how the height was part of the message, and how I'd just spent a morning proving that altitude is not the same as elevation. I called my mother from the lobby. The marble made an echo of everything: footsteps, voices, my own breathing. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did. She was never far from the phone and never waiting by it either. Both things, somehow.
How'd it go?
No inflection on the question. The way she asked things she already knew the answer to. She'd known how it would go before I did. She'd known since a kitchen table in Harlem, 25 years earlier. Well, I said. 2 seconds of quiet. She was letting me decide how much to tell.
Tell me everything.
And I laughed, the way you laugh when the weight lifts, and the relief is so physical that laughter is the only thing that makes sense, standing in the lobby of a building that had just asked me to come back. Holding a gold pen that had never needed to write a single word to say everything it said. My mother waited on the line, the way she'd waited her whole life, patiently, completely, certain.
And I told her. Everything. Every minute of it. It took a while. She didn't rush me once. I'm gonna tell you the thing that took me the longest to learn. It took me 31 years and 2 lost promotions and 1 quiet morning on a 42nd floor. So I'll give it to you for free, and you can decide what it's worth. Being underestimated is not a failure of the people who do it to you. It is information. That reframe changed my entire life. So let me say it again. It is not an insult to absorb. It is data to use. It tells you where the gap is. It tells you what they haven't accounted for. It tells you precisely where you have the most room to move. The person who underestimates you has handed you a map of their blind spot. Most people are too busy being offended to read it. I stopped being angry at rooms that didn't expect me the day I understood that their expectation was never the ceiling. It was just the floor I was starting from. And a floor, a low one, only means you have further to rise, and more witnesses when you do. I think about Renee sometimes, the brilliant one, the one who left tired. I don't think she was wrong to leave. Some rooms cost more than they pay, and leaving is its own kind of intelligence. But I think about the version of her that stayed, somewhere, in some other firm. I hope she clicked her pen. I think about the young woman who took over my seat at the analyst pool after I left. I think about the ones who are in that seat right now, in firms across the city, walking into rooms that paused when they entered. I think about every person who has walked into a room and felt the assumption press against them in the first 3 seconds, and chosen, deliberately, quietly, to let the work speak instead. That choice is not weakness. That choice is the most sophisticated form of power I know. Loud power announces itself and asks to be feared. Quiet power simply becomes undeniable and lets you arrive at the conclusion on your own. One of them needs an audience. The other one needs only to be right and to wait. My mother never made partner. She never needed anyone in that firm to give her what she already had. They couldn't promote her into it because they'd never owned it to give. It was always hers. What she gave me instead was the understanding that recognition is not something you receive. It is something you eventually make impossible to withhold. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and the difference is where I have built my entire life. The gold pen is still in my breast pocket. It's a little more worn now. I still don't click it in meetings. I sit and I listen and I count, and I let the room reveal itself. Except when I need to. And when I need to, that one small, precise sound, it's enough. It has always been enough. If you made it here, then you've sat with Simone's story for a while now. And I don't think that's an accident. I think you recognized something in it. Maybe the room, maybe the pause, maybe the stack of papers traveling past your hands, maybe the choice to let the work speak when everything in you wanted to speak louder. Wherever you are in the world right now, whatever room you've been walking into or walking away from, I want you to know that this channel was built for that. For the stories that don't get told because they happened quietly, for the victories that didn't come with announcements, for the women and the men who held the pen and waited and then used it at exactly the right moment. If your story lives somewhere inside what you just heard, or if it's a completely different kind of quiet triumph, we want to receive it. Write to us at vellumoflife@gmail.com. Tell us what happened. Tell us what you learned. Tell us the part you've never said out loud before, the detail you've carried alone because it never seemed to have a place to go. It has a place now. We will protect your identity completely. Your name, your city, every detail that could connect the story back to you, all of it transformed. What remains is only what's true and powerful and worth sharing.
And we'll share it with people who need it. People who are sitting in rooms right now that haven't accounted for them yet. People who are about to click their pen and don't know it yet.
Leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. They travel further than you think. Quiet things usually do.
Thank you for being here. This is Vellum of Life. Until the next chapter.